Hello friends, my name is Sarang. So in this video, we're going to learn how to do the JWT authentication and authorization for gRPC microservices using Spring Security. So we have been doing this JWT auth and authorization for REST-based microservices. So in this video, we're going to see how to do the authentication authorization for your gRPC microservices. Okay, and if you're new to gRPC, then I would recommend you to watch these 4 videos, and this video will give you a good understanding about how to develop one gRPC microservices using Spring Boot. And now I think let's head towards the IntelliJ IDE. So to do the JWT auth and authorization for your gRPC, these are the dependencies that would require in your application. So I have a Spring Boot starter, and then I have a Spring Boot starter security using which we're gonna create the secured APIs, or in the gRPC world we can say the services methods, or the RPC. And then we would also have the gRPC server Spring Boot starter and the JSON Web Token dependency for creating JWT and also to parse the JWT. And then we have the Java XML bind dependencies required, since I'm using the Java version 11. So this dependency has been rolled out in the version Java 9, so we have to explicitly add this dependency. And then I also have the Spring Boot starter test. And these are the extension and the plugin that would require to generate the gRPC services and also generate the Java POJO classes based on the protofiles. Okay, so before I move to the code, I would also like you to recollect that what we used to do for the REST-based JWT auth and authorization. So we used to have an endpoint with the name called register, where we used to save the user in the DB. Right, and then we used to have one endpoint with the name login or authenticate user. So here we used to return the JWT to the user, or we can say to the mobile app or the web app. So using this JWT, the user would call the secured APIs, and the secured APIs would be, let's say, get employee, or we can say create employee. So these are the secured APIs. So the JWT that has been written in the login endpoint, that needs to be passed in the header for the secured APIs in order to do a secured authentication and authorization for this APIs, right? So these are the REST-based security endpoints that we used to create, and there could be a difference in the name, but the concept is same. So if you want to do similar in the gRPC, we're gonna look in this video how to do that. So I'm not gonna save the user in the DB. I will have some user hard-coded in the application, and we will create one service with the name authenticate. So in using that service, gRPC service, we're gonna create a JWT and return that JWT to the postman or to the application. And then we will also have one secured service, a gRPC service, where the JWT would be mandatory. If the JWT is not passed in the this gRPC service, then we will return the permission denied error in the response. Okay, so let's head towards the protofile. So let me create first a protofile. Okay, so I will just name this as proto. Sorry that I've just misspelled this. And inside that I will create one schema.proto. Okay, and so if you're not aware about this proto and how to create one proto file, so I'll be recommend you to go through all these videos. This will help you to understand the process of creating the gRPC microservice using Spring Boot. Okay, so let me start with writing the syntax, and I would use the syntax proto3. Okay, then I will also add an option to generate multiple Java classes. So all the classes would be created in the independent file. It's not going to be in one file. So also I'm going to write a package name where all the classes would be generated. So it would be com.devproblems, and then I'm going to create one service with the name auth service. Okay, so these are the syntax for service we have to write. We have to write like authenticate, or you can also write here login. So here I would pass one JWT request, so that would contain the username and password. Okay, and I would return one JWT token. Okay, so I need to create the structure of this JWT request. So I'll just copy this name and I'm going to write it here, and here it would have a username and also one password. Okay, so I'll also create a structure for JWT token, and this would have just one property with the name JWT token. Okay, let me get rid of this. Okay, so this would be the structure of the classes. I'll just write it like this, JWT token. Okay, and now I'll also have one more service with the name called service. I'll just write it like employee service. Okay, and here I'm gonna write one RPC which would have a get employee info, and here I don't want to pass any arguments here. So what I'm gonna pass here is the empty object. So it's gonna be Google proto empty. So this object I need to import it, so I'll import that as well, and here I will return one employee structure. So I'll just write it as message employee. So this service, the employee service, is going to be a secured service, and this service will return one JWT to the user. Okay, so here I will return the name of the employee, and I will return one salary of the employee. Okay, so here this I need to import it here. So I'll write import, then I'll write Google protobuf empty dot proto. So this would be the structure. So I not sure what I have done wrong here. Yeah, so this is fine. So this would be the structure. So this particular model will be used in this particular service method authenticate, where we'll pass the username and password, and then in return we'll give a JWT token, and this would be a type string. And then I have created one secured service which expect you to add a JWT in the header, and then only you can able to access this particular endpoint. And also you should have a role admin. So we'll define all the roles here in a minute. So now let's go ahead and generate the Java classes for the things that we have mentioned in the profile. Okay, yeah, the build got succeeded. So now we could see under the generated sources a couple of classes would have been generated. So these are the classes that we are mentioning the proto got generated here. And now using this we'll proceed with our work, and I'm gonna create a package, the name called service. I'm gonna give the name of the service as not Kotlin, so this is gonna be auth gRPC service. Okay, and this service needs to extend auth impl base. Okay, and this has to override the authenticate method. Okay, now I'm also going to create one more service, that is employee gRPC service. Okay, I'll write extend, and I will write employee impl base, and similarly I will just click on override methods. It would have this get employee info. So whoever have access to this endpoint, they would get the information of one of the employees. So I've just made this up. So I'll write on next, write employee.newBuilder. I'll just write set name, I'll write the problems, and I will write salary. I'll just write 123.build. Okay, then I will complete the flow by clicking on this on completed method. So this would be a gRPC service. So I have to annotate this as a gRPC service, And in order to mention the rules here, right, so I've mentioned that only the user with the role admin can able to access this particular service method. So in order to declare those kind of rules, we have to create one config package, and here I'm gonna create a security config class. And this class, in this class, what I have to do is I have to create one bean, and this would be gRPC security metadata source. Okay, and here I have to create the object of this manual security gRPC security metadata source, and here I'm going to define some rules here, and I'm going to write access predicate. By default, it will permit all the users to access all the service methods, and this should be a default. And I'm going to write one rule over here for the employee gRPC service. So it should be employee service gRPC. Hang on. So again, I have just inputted the wrong one. Dot employee get employee info method should only be accessed by a user which has a role admin. So I have just defined the rule here. So if you remember, in the role in the REST based microservices also, we have to implement one filter chain method, and that we used to write all the rules like this for all the endpoints. And now we are good with this. I've just written this particular object. So this is how you need to create a bean, and also you need to create one more bean with the name called access decision manager. So this bean is like mandatory if you want to do a security for gRPC, because in the REST based microservice we never create the bean of this type because it is handled internally, but the gRPC dependencies that you have added in the pom.xml, that is gRPC server Spring Boot starter, would require you to have this particular bean declared in the one of the config. So this is how you need to write. You have to create a list of access decision voter, and I'll just give it as a array list, and I will add the new access predicate voter and just return the new anonymous based and pass this object inside. That's it, and mark this as configuration. So now if you remember, if you're doing with the Spring security, you would also need a bean with the name authentication manager. So this bean is also required. You need to mention it explicitly here. So it's going to be an authentication manager. Okay, here you have to return one provider manager. Inside that you need to pass one authentication provider. So since we don't have a default authentication for JWT inside the Spring security, we have it for DAO, but we don't have it for JWT. For that, what we have to do is we have to create our own JWT auth provider. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one new package, the name JWT, and here I'm going to write JWT auth provider. Okay, and this will implement the authentication provider. So here we are supposed to implement two methods. So we'll come back to this method, but let's mark this as component. Okay, and let's import this here. So I will write private final JWT auth provider. Okay, so let's do the constructor injection, and I will just write it here, JWT auth provider. That's it. So here what we have to do is we have to write a logic like how to get the role of the user. We'll get the role of the user from the database. So all these things will go inside that. But I would like to implement first like how we're going to create the JWT here. So that will go under this service name authenticate. So whenever the user is calling this particular method, he will get the JWT in return. So let's write a logic like how we're gonna build the JWT. So we're gonna use dependencies that we have added in the pom.xml for JWT JSON web token, and we're gonna set the subject for now we're gonna set it empty, and then we will set a claim. So claim is nothing but the authorities or the roles of the user. So again, I'll keep it empty for now. I'll set the issued date. So we'll write it now. So for this, I have to create an instant of here. So instant now, and this will be instant dot. Okay, let me write it again. Now is equal to instant dot now, and now I'm gonna write it like instant expiration equal to now dot plus. So I will keep the expiration date of the JWT for 1 hour. Okay, so that is what I'm gonna write it here. So I'll just write it like this: set expiration date as date dot from expiration. Okay, and I will also sign it with one key. Okay, so I'll use the algorithm HS15512. So here I have to pass one key, and I'll just pass one key here in a minute. So I'll just make it as a compact. So I just have to declare one key. So that key I will define it here in the application property with the name JWT dot signing dot key equal to dev problems. So you can have any key you want, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this key and bring it in this particular service by using the value annotation. I forgot the double quotes. So it's going to be JWT dot signing dot key, and I will also write it like JWT. Okay, a lot of typos I guess. JWT secret key. Okay, and the same key I'm gonna use it here. I'll sign the JWT with this key. Okay, cool. So here we have created a JWT. So we have to wrap this JWT. So in return we'll get a JWT here. So we have to kind of return the JWT token in the response. So we have to create the object of this. So we'll write JWT token dot new builder dot set JWT token. So this will give us the token dot build, and then if you're giving the response in the gRPC, you have to wrap it in the on next. So I'll wrap it on next, and then I will just write response observer dot on completed. Okay, so now we know how to create the JWT now, but we haven't given the information of the user yet. We have to give the information of the user as in the name of the user and the authorities or the roles the user carry, right? So all these things we have to do it in the JWT auth provider. So we have to kind of auto wire that JWT auth provider. Again, I will do the construction injection, and here I'm going to write dot authenticate, and here it expects you to have the instance of authentication, which is an interface. So there is one class username password authentication token, in which we have to pass the username and password. Okay, so this would give us, hang on for a second, so this would give us one authentication instance, and using this we can pass the username. So string authentication dot get principal, and here we will give the authorities we have to kind of extract from this authentication instance. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a logic for this: string authorities equal to authentication dot get authorities dot stream dot map. I'm going to write grant authority dot joining using comma, because there are going to be a comma separated roles for the users, and here I'm going to pass it authorities. Okay, nice. So we have created a logic for generating the JWT, and also to pass the role of the users in this key with the name auth. Okay, so whenever we generate the JWT, we can see one of the key getting added in that JWT with the name auth, and that will carry a role of the users. So now we have only pending one thing to implement here is the authenticate method. So what we're gonna do here is, so if we just go back, when the user click on this authenticate or hit this particular authenticate method, we will go inside this authentication method, right? And then we are passing this username password authentication token. So in this constructor, when we just pass two parameters, it sets the authentication as false. Okay, so we have to kind of make this as true. In order to make this as true, we have to also pass the authorities of the user. Authorities is nothing but the role of the users. Okay, so let's go and implement that authentication thing. So if I write if the user is not authenticated, then what we have to do is we have to give the roles of that user in the in that object. Okay, so how to create role of the users? For that, if you remember, if you have implemented the JWT flow in the REST based microservices, so there we have to kind of implement. Oh, I forgot to write class. Just a second. Oh, sorry. Class implement user detail service. So this service used to invoked in order to load the user from the database. Okay. So here I'm not going to integrate any database here. So what I'm going to do is I will hardcode few of the users. So it's going to be equal. If the username is Sarang, okay, I'm going to give him a role called admin. And if the user is some other, then I will give a role called role user, and here I'm gonna give a variable to it with the name role. So now I have to convert this role to grant authorities, simple grant authorities. For that, what I'm gonna do is I'll create a list and pass this, and I'm gonna write it like this. So I have to wrap it under a new simple I misspelled this, grant authorities. I think I granted authorities, sorry, and this would be a role, and I have to kind of remove this and generate a new variable here, which would have a list of simple grant authorities, and then I just have to wrap this user in this class, username, password, and the authorities. So this is the user from the Spring Security. I have to import this. So this is from the Spring Security user. Okay, so what I have to do is now I have to create an instance of this domain user class and create this, call this load user by username, and here I have to pass the user. So I'll just get the name. Okay, so this method would be called, and if the username is Sarang, we'll give a role admin, and if there is something else, we'll give a role user. So now this will return us user detail reference, and we have to use this reference in order to make the user as authenticator. So what I'm going to do is user details dot get username, user details dot get password, and user details dot get authorities. That's it. So now we have made the user authenticated, and if the user is already authenticated, so I just have to return that same reference that we are getting. Okay, so now this is the flow, and also we have to kind of write here that we're gonna always pass this instance to this method. So username, password, authentication token. I will just write this as class. Okay, so now when we are calling this method, if you remember, we are also always passing the username, password, authentication token. That's the reason we have also written here that we're going to pass this particular class. Okay, so now when is the user is not authenticated here? So we have written if condition. So when the user wants to create a JWT, at that time the user is not authenticated, right? So I'll just go to the auth service. So when user is calling this method, that means he needs a JWT, and we will give a JWT by wrapping all the roles and everything into that JWT, and we'll give it to the user. But when the user is already having a JWT, we have to kind of read that JWT and validate whether the JWT is valid or not, right? So for that, we have to create another bean for gRPC, that is gRPC authentication reader. So this, when the user is sending the JWT in order to call the secured services, which is in our case it's get employee info, then we have to validate the JWT, right? So we have to write a logic in this particular bean. So I'll write new bearer auth, and I will get a token, and using that JWT token, what I'm going to do is first to just validate that JWT, I have to create a parser and set a signing key. The key that I have used, if you remember, that I have used here as a dev problem, so I'm gonna reuse this here as well. While parsing, I would need that key, so I'm gonna keep it here like this, and I will pass the secret key, and I'll pass the claims, I'll pass the token inside, and I'll get the body. So let me introduce a variable. I got the claims. Okay, so the claims would be embedded in the JWT token, so that's what I've got here, claims. And now let me just check the claims whether user has let me just rename this as claims. Okay, claims dot get auth. Okay, so I'll just do toString, and then I will do a split because the user can have multiple roles that will be comma separated. Okay, that's the reason we have doing like this. So map simple grant authority granted authority new, and I'm gonna collect to that list, and I'm gonna introduce a new variable with the name auth. So now using this, we have to create a Spring security user. So I'll explain why we need this. Okay, so write claims dot get subject, and password is not required, and I'll just write claims dot get we just need an authority, right? So these are the authorities, so I will just rename this as authorities. So we have extracted the roles of the user in this particular list. That's what we have mentioned here. So I'll import the user, and then I will just return the new username password authentication, and here I'm write user dot get username, user dot okay, so dot get password, and then I have to pass, sorry, I can pass the entire user here itself, so user token and the authorities. Okay, so this is done. So when the token comes, we will write we will pass the token, and we will extract the claims from the JWT, and then we'll create an object of the user and just pass it over here. And this when we return this username password authentication token, this will go inside this particular JWT auth provider. And since here we have used the constructor which has 3 parameters, so the user would be authenticated. Okay, and then we are not doing anything here. For when the user is already authenticated, we will just return the authentication. If the user is not, then we will go and get the roles of the user and all these things, right? So I think, yeah, so we have completed the implementation. Now let's go and test it out, the application. So let me just compile the project and see whether we don't have any errors in the application. Okay, everything seems fine. So now let me just close all the tabs for confusion, and let me also check whether I have all the annotations here. I have to write it here as a gRPC service, and this is already a gRPC, and this is fine. We have the schema.proto. Everything looks fine. Let me close the tabs and let me start the application. Yeah, it started well. So let me open the Postman. So we will call the gRPC service from the Postman. Okay, so we will just close this, don't save, we'll write new. Okay, so they have changed it a bit, the UI has been changed, but it's fine. So I'll just write import a proto file. So I'll go get it from my project, the same proto file that I've used to generate the code. Okay, I'll go click next, import as API. Okay, so now I think I can, yeah, I got all the methods here which are there in the microservice, authenticate and get employee info. So I'll just click on authenticate and I'll just give the port and the server information. So it is started at 9090. That's what I have it here. In the message, I would need a username password since I'm calling the authenticate, right? So I would need a password, could be anything. But if I pass the user at Sarang, that user will get a role admin. If you remember here, if I go inside the auth provider, I have one. If the user is Sarang, then he will get a role called admin inside the JWT. Okay, so let me invoke. So I got the JWT. Okay, so let me go and show it in the Chrome. That if I just go and see what's inside the JWT, just to confirm that. So as you can see, the auth is role admin now because the username is Sarang. Okay, now using this JWT, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the secured method. Okay, so I will just go to bearer token and pass this token over here. I don't need any body here for this get employee info. So as you can see, the secured API has been called for the username Sarang, and the information is this dev problems 123. If you remember, here is the information that the user Sarang has got. So now let me go and create a JWT for a different user. So I'll just click no auth since it's an authenticate. I will generate some example and I will just write anything and I will change the username, and again I will call, and now I would have got the role as role user. I will go to JWT, I got the role user. Okay, now for the role user, if you remember that we have not given an access to invoke the employee service, we have only given access to the user who has role admin role. Now if we call, if we use this JWT and call the get employee info, okay, so let me go and rewrite the bearer token for this user. So we got permission denied as an error because the role user don't have access to invoke the secure method, that is get employee info. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reverse the thing. Now I will give access to the user for the user who has only role called role user, right? So let me restart the application. Okay, so I will again create a JWT for a Sarang. Okay, Sarang, I'm going to create it. I'm going to write no auth, and if you remember, Sarang will always get a role admin. So I got the JWT in return. Okay, now I'll just validate this. So he got a role admin, and now he should not be able to invoke this get employee info because we have changed the rule over here. Okay, now I'll empty this section and I will just copy paste the bearer token over here. He got the permission denied exception right now. Previously he was not getting it. Previously we have given an access to access the endpoint for get employee info for Sarang. Now he's not able to. Okay, so now let me create a different user who is not Sarang. So I will just go to authenticate, use example, and I'm gonna write it here as Kumar. Okay, he will get a role user, or I can just write some different thing. I will just write dev problems, any username. Okay, now I got the response. Let me just go ahead and just verify he got the role user. So using this JWT, I'm gonna invoke the get employee info. He should be able to access it. Copy paste. Okay, now he is able to access it because we have changed the rule here that the user who has a role user can only able to access this secured method, which is get employee info. So as you can see that we also changed the rule and we have created the JWT from scratch, and we have understood the flow of JWT that one service method would generate the JWT and give it the user, and another one would be the one who is always secure, and based on the rules that we have mentioned here, the JWT will be validated and the decision would be made by this particular being whether that user has access or not. Okay, so I think this is pretty much you need to do the JWT authentication and authorization for the gRPC microservices, right? So these are the bean that is required for the gRPC dependency that you have added. So you need to have authentication manager, this one JWT reader, and JWT, or you can say gRPC security metadata source, and one decision maker. So if you have these beans in your configuration, then you are good to go to do the security implementation for your gRPC microservices. Okay, so if you like the video, just let me know in the comment section. Do subscribe to the channel if you are new, and yeah, thank you and have a great day.